What is something your parents did while raising you that you realized is fucked up after looking back on it? I remember when I was a kid I had this cute cat toy that I took everywhere. I loved that thing so much that I felt that it was alive and loved me back. One day, I was watching TV through the hole in my wall and giggled at a funny scene. My dad heard me and stormed into my room. I explained that the hole was already there, but he didn't care. He screamed, "If you wanna break my THINHS, it'll break yours," as he proceeded to rip my cat's arm off. This was later explained as child abuse. My stepdad said he would have spanked me and told me not to do that. I expected him to tell me to fix it. I would have been upset that I couldn't watch the TV anymore, but I wouldn't have gotten childhood trauma 9 years later, and I'm still looking for a new one. I had this little stuffed penguin. Loved him. Took him everywhere. One day my dad mocked me for it. I was 12, and I was devastated. He was dead serious. That's just cruel. My brother is 13 and still sleeps with his stuffed elephant, has had since the day he was born. If anyone makes fun of him for it, I will rip them a new one. I'm 28 and I still sleep with a stuffed animal. Not original but a new one. I like wrapping my arms around something. I'll use a pillow if I have to, but my stuffed dog is my go-to. They would be furious if I liked something that was either too juvenile for me or not marketed toward my gender. They would talk about how I'm being a baby, ask me how my peers would react if they knew I liked baby and or girl stuff. They'd tell me how smart they thought I was and how I was ruining my intelligence by liking that stuff instead of doing independent study or whatever. Did I mention they would do this before I was even 12 years old? It's not like I was 25 and still living with them. I was a tomboy from as soon as I knew I didn't have to wear the girly stuff, probably 6 or 7. My mum would tell me how nice I could look if I tried, how I used to like wearing girl stuff until I decided to be awkward, and how did I think she felt having to go out with me looking like that? I'm 34 now, and she still says stuff like that on the rare occasions we see each other, and wonders why I moved in with my dad when I was 10. Sorry to hear this. Kids are kids and they are their true selves. I'll let my son wear and pick out what he wants. Unicorn backpack? Awesome. Shiny Van slip-ons? You got it. As a 25-year-old living at home, I feel personally attacked. Both my parents always complimented me on how mature I was for my age, and would brag to people how grown up, but easy, mature, etc. I was, but looking back I realized this was really just an excuse for them not to parent at all, and a way to put being the grown up on me. Always saying things like that to me made me get a lot of my self-worth from being really independent and taking care of myself, and made me think that I was being immature or letting them down if I actually needed or wanted anything from them. I don't remember once being told to brush my teeth, or do my homework, or anyone making sure I was up in time for the bus, or wearing something weather appropriate, or had breakfast snacks, etc. Lots of things like that. I've basically realized that I mostly was just left to my own devices to raise myself, and that I had bought into the trap of, oh, I was just such a good kid that I never really needed anything, when really every kid needs parenting. But if you did make a mistake or needed their help, were they there for you then? I was raised like you. I just managed myself and never needed my parents for anything. Oh dear, this sounds so eerily familiar. One time my brother and I got into a fight when I was about 8. He was about 10 at the time, and I shoved him to the ground. Later my parents took his side without hearing my side of the story, so I said that I was going to run away, normal emotional little kid stuff. Well, my dad grabbed a suitcase and packed it up with all my clothes and straight up threw it at me. It knocked me to the ground, and they told me to leave. You missed the part where a man threw a suitcase full of clothes at his 8-year-old son so that it knocked him over and threatened to abandon him. There's absolutely nothing respectable about that. I once told my dad that he had all the really neat stuff in his office. I was about 8. He went into a fury and took me over there and tore the stuff down and hung it in my bedroom. Everything. I had Employee of the Month plaques on my wall for 6 months. Strange. That is terrifying behavior because it really makes no sense. My mom purposefully lost me in a store one day. I was 5. Kids wander, space out, etc. It's a parent's job to look after their kids. So I was out in a store one day with my mom and I spaced out, and when I came back to the present moment, my mom was nowhere in sight. I started crying and wandering around and calling for her. I went to a store associate and told them I couldn't find my mom. They called for her over the PA system and she came and got me. Years later she told me she did that on purpose, so I would stay close to her when we were out shopping. She said she was tired of me not minding her and staying close to her, so she ditched me and hid behind stuff when I was crying and looking for her. She said, "I had my eye on you the whole time." I was so hurt that she would scare me like that and do something so cruel. One of many ways my mom used fear, intimidation, and psychological torture to keep me and my siblings in line. I 50-year male recently learned from my mother that when I was a toddler and preschooler my father would scream and yell at me, calling me horrible names because I wet the bed. I don't really have any conscious memory of it, but it sure explains a lot. I didn't remind my mother that she used to threaten us, my brother and me, by saying she would take us to the orphanage. When I was ages 8 to 15 my mother forced me to go to a therapist for behavioral issues and threatened to put me up for adoption because I was acting like a normal teenager just trying to figure out life. I'd be bawling my eyes out on the kitchen floor while she was on the phone with Department of Heath, the social services, not understanding why she was doing this to me. When I bring it up now she just says we didn't know how to handle a teenager. Okay. You put her in the cheapest Medicare home you can find, hours away from anywhere she knows, and tell her we just didn't know how to handle the elderly. When my mum got divorced from my dad, my mum, my sister and I had to move to this tiny council flat. My sister and I shared a room. My sister hated it because she hated me, so she demanded to have our rooms separated. My mum, who actually worked as a paint and decorator and knew a bit about home repair as well, put up a wall between the biggest bedroom and the flat, so my sister and I could have separate rooms. She got the side with the windows. I lived in a bedroom with no windows for nearly 8 years before we ended up moving. It was extremely depressing, but as a kid, I didn't really know how to put those feelings into words. There were many other things my sister got that I didn't, and it took me years of self-administered therapy to sort through the resentment and anger and come to a place in my life where I could just say, "It happened, get over it." My dad took me to a bar for my 5th birthday. It was called McDougal's. It sounded close enough to McDonald's for me. He proceeded to get hammered, and another couple at the bar saw it and distracted me by giving me quarters to play one of those glass table video games while they called my mom. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but my mom told me that was the day she decided to leave him. My father would go the bar to sign in. I would be in the car. Seemed like forever. Not sure to this day how many beer he had while in there. Same thing with me. One time I was bored, so I turned the volume on the radio up full blast. My dad put the key in the ignition and I can tell you, he was not amused. I used to get into trouble for breathing in the car and fogging up the windows. Dude, is this in Kennewick, Washington? My parents would ask my siblings and I which parent we would live with if we had to choose one. When my mum left my dad, she drove 4 hours away to her hometown without telling him. I was 5. On the drive she asked me if I wanted to go to hometown for a holiday or to live. I'd never moved house before, so I excitedly declared I wanted to live there. She acted as if that made her decision for her. Later I realized dad and my dog weren't with us, and I asked were they coming. Mum said no, they couldn't move, but because it said we were moving the decision had been made now. I was a teenager before I realized me wanting to move was not the reason my parents divorced. I'm so sorry, excellent amphibian. That's a terrible burden for a little heart. Wow, your mom was messed up for that. That's so sad. It's not ill-intended, but my mom would talk about me to everyone as if I were someone turkid and hyper-intelligent then. When I didn't live up to those expectations, a lot of people assumed I was some lazy sleazebag. You mean you weren't one of the first humans on the 400-day interplanetary expansion to Mars? Geez, what a loser. Dude, my mom did that too. It was always bragging about me to everyone, saying how smart I was. Then when I dropped out of college they acted like I was a huge fucking loser who has no future. My brother quickly became the favorite, and they all moved halfway across the country without me. Sounds like there is another story here. Mom told everyone, their mothers and their kitchen sinks, that I was gifted when I learned how to use a computer. I knew Paint and Office. If I did something to get my dad mad at me, even if it was as little as not hearing him call me upstairs from my room, he'd make me stand outside and watch the family eat dinner. It could be snowing out, and I'd be outside the dining room, watching them eat around the table. I can relate. When I did something to get my mom mad at me, she would hide all the food in the house and leave for work, leaving me hungry all day and sometimes all night too. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone anything, and if I did it would result in a beating, or yelling really hurtful things. Like one time she said, if I knew this is what it was like having a child I never would have had you. I was 5'6" at the time. Internet hug. Dude, you did not deserve that. That broke my heart. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Punishing me for not having the right answer in my homework whenever they decided to help me. Tried asking less of their help throughout my youth, but they left the job of raising me to my sister anyways. My dad thought it's a good way to help me with my homework if he stood behind me and screamed at me how dumb I am. My dad did this too. I would stay at school and do my homework so I wouldn't have to deal with it. He figured it out and would scream at me anyway. Couldn't win. I'm sorry. Staying at school never crossed my mind. Same TBH, 100% improvement guaranteed, sure. I can relate. I remember getting pencils broken on my wrists when I didn't know the right answer. When I was a child I didn't like fish, but my mom would force me to eat it if it was what was made for dinner. I would have to sit at the table for hours until I had eaten it all. More than once I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. She also forced me to eat crab once, which caused me to throw up. I'm now 28, and to this day I still can't even try to eat any seafood. My mind immediately goes back to those moments, and I get extremely nauseous. Even just the smell of fish triggers it. I hate that I'm like this. Being forced to eat something you dislike is horrible. Don't hate yourself for it. Memories cannot be controlled. You just have to live with them and know how to prevent them coming up as much as possible.